If you've been living under a rock, you will have probably seen that the US Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, for those who do not know what that is the nationwide decision that secured the legal right to have an abortion in the US in 1973. This decision has shone a light on abortion all across the world. It has become an international story with solidarity protests held in countries across the globe. But it is also a deeply personal story for many women, including myself. I was so shocked at how difficult it was to get an abortion here in the UK that I decided I had no choice but to write about it. So I found out I was pregnant when I was in Westfield Shopping Centre in Stratford, and I just felt like didn't feel right physically. I went into Boots, I bought a pregnancy test, but even as I was walking through Boots with that pregnancy test, I just knew in my heart of hearts that I must be pregnant. You know, the physical symptoms were undeniable. When I took a pregnancy test, it said I was 3 weeks pregnant, but it later transpired I was far further along in my pregnancy. So yeah, I called up Homerton Hospital in Hackney. It's actually the hospital where I was born, bizarrely. And I got an automated message on the phone and it said, you know, we will call you back in 24 hours. 24 hours came and went, but no phone call came. So I ended up calling British Pregnancy Advisory Service, which is the UK's largest abortion provider. And I was put on hold for ages, and there was actually another automated voice who said, we are experiencing exceptionally high volumes of calls. So I decided to give up and I thought I'll send an email. 2 days later, I received a phone call from a man from BPAS. He said they were grappling with serious delays. He said that they were getting 1,000 requests for an abortion a day. He also told me I'd have to wait 3 weeks for an abortion consultation, that being my first appointment. That would have left me a couple of weeks away from the cutoff point for a medical abortion. Now, a medical abortion involves taking 2 pills, whereas a surgical abortion involves going into theatre, going under general anaesthetic. While abortions are extremely safe, it is better to have the procedure earlier on in the pregnancy. I was fully aware that the longer it was taking me to access these services, the more I was putting my health at risk. So I was totally unaware of how painful medical abortions are. But the pain that I went on to experience was the worst pain I've experienced in my life. It was just unimaginable. No matter how I positioned myself, I just couldn't get comfortable. I was lying on the floor, literally writhing in pain. I must have been to the toilet about 30 times, you know, in the space of a couple of hours. It was just like nothing I've experienced before. But then eventually it did subside, and the feeling afterwards was reminiscent of, you know, a sea of calm after a violent storm. And it was almost like, did this ever happen? The nurse and the midwife told me I must be on guard for severe bleeding. They told me I'd have to go to hospital if blood was pouring out like urine. So I was incessantly checking, you know, to make sure I wasn't bleeding to death. So it was obviously much easier for me to access an abortion than a lot of others. You know, I've been working as women's correspondent for over 4 years. I write about abortion services in the UK a lot, and I have a lot of contacts in this area who were very kindly able to speed up the process for me. I don't deserve preferential treatment. All women in the UK should be able to access an abortion. Knowing how difficult getting an abortion can be, I have been reflecting on the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade in America and how it will affect women there. Before safe and legal abortion, terminating a pregnancy in states where abortion was illegal could be a death sentence for women. It's impossible to truly say how many abortions were performed before Roe v. Wade, and estimates vary wildly, but we do know that in the 1930s, almost 2,700 women died from complications arising from abortion, and we can safely say that number was so much higher than the current number because of the prevalence of illegal abortions. A 1976 study from the Centre for Disease Control looked at abortion data for the 3 years before and the 3 years after Roe v. Wade was passed. It found that illegal abortion fell from 130,000 to just 17,000, and consequently deaths from abortion fell from 39 to just 5. Regardless of your personal feelings about the morality of abortion, it is an unequivocal fact that easy, safe and legal access to abortion results in far fewer women dying. Prior to Roe, the legality of abortion varied from state to state. Elective abortion was available in Alaska, California, Hawaii, New York, Washington and Washington, D.C., but it was illegal in the state of Texas, where Norma McCorvey, better known by her legal pseudonym of Jane Roe, filed a lawsuit claiming the Texan abortion laws were unconstitutional. This case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court and essentially argued that the right to privacy, outlined in the 14th Amendment, extended to cover a woman's choice to seek an abortion. What's really important is that Roe v. Wade didn't legalise abortion because the Supreme Court doesn't pass laws. Instead, it ruled that laws banning abortion could not be enforced on constitutional grounds. This meant that the moment that the Supreme Court repealed Roe v. Wade in 2022, many states immediately snapped back to the legislation they had in 1973, with some states outlawing the practice entirely. Some of these laws, of course, shock all over the world. Take the story of a 10-year-old girl, pregnant as the result of rape, having to cross state lines to access an abortion because abortion had been made illegal in her home state of Ohio. Democrats have had 50 years to enshrine nationwide abortion rights in law, which would have protected abortion rights in the event that Roe v. Wade was struck down. And many pro-choice protesters who are rightfully angry at this ruling are pointing their finger at the Democrats for their failure to protect abortion rights, showing it's not just those who seek to limit abortion rights who are to blame, it is also those who are complacent in upholding those rights. Abortion has always been a complex issue, particularly in the US. But interestingly, when Roe v. Wade was passed in the 1970s, abortion was a much more bipartisan issue, with a Gallup poll in 1977 showing that Republicans and Democrats held very similar views on abortion. But as the years rolled on, attitudes towards abortion became more and more divided along partisan lines. While the majority of Americans have become increasingly pro-choice, the Republican Party have made anti-abortion issues a cornerstone of their policies. The repealing of Roe v. Wade was a result of a decades-long battle from the Republican Party. It happened despite overwhelming pro-abortion sentiment from the American public. They've done this despite the fact that millions of children in the US live in desperate poverty, and every day an average of 12 children dies from gun violence. Surely a party that claims to be pro-life should be tackling these issues that are getting worse and worse by the day. When the US Supreme Court decision was leaked, it took millions of women in the US and the world by surprise, and it's important that we remember that when we look at abortion in the UK. The UK has had some form of legalised abortion since 1967, but the regulations around abortion in the UK are murky at best. The Offences Against a Person Act of 1861 deemed it unlawful for a woman to act with intent to procure her own miscarriage, and it carried with it a potential life sentence. This law has never officially been revoked. But in 1967, the UK passed the Abortion Act, which provided exceptions to existing laws and allowed women to get an abortion if two doctors sign a letter confirming that giving birth posed the risk of death or injury to the mother or child, or giving birth posed a risk to the mother's mental health, or if the child born were to suffer from serious physical or mental disabilities. 1 in 3 women in the UK will have an abortion in their lifetime, and public support for abortion rights is high in the UK, but many people fail to realise just how precarious the right to have an abortion is here in the UK. In legal terms, there are still many restrictions around abortions in the UK, and if you break those rules and restrictions, you can be convicted of a criminal offence. In the last 10 years, this has happened dozens of times. It's worth considering the various reasons women seek abortions. They might not be able to afford a child, they might be in an abusive relationship, they might be very young and scared to go to their parents because their parents hold anti-abortion views, or the pregnancy might be the result of rape. In the UK, the anti-abortion movement is small but very vocal. Most prominently, you have Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is not only vocally anti-abortion, but has consistently voted against making abortion more accessible. And he has even said on record he doesn't believe in abortion in cases of rape or incest.
The unborn child.
Are you completely opposed to abortion in all circumstances?
Yes, I am.
Rape and incest?
Sexual violence?
I'm afraid so.
Really?
There is also something called the All-Party Parliamentary Pro-Life Group, which is a group of anti-abortion MPs from all parties, including the Conservatives, Labour and the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland, who are committed to limiting abortion. Now, in the wider community, there is a pro-life movement who have grown increasingly emboldened by Roe v. Wade being overturned in the US. Anti-abortion activists in the UK employ a range of tactics in a bid to stop women from having abortions. Now, this spans from chasing women down the street, aggressively shouting at them, calling them murderer, calling them mum. There have been cases when babies' clothes have been found in bushes, and it also involves distributing medically erroneous pamphlets which basically say that abortion is dangerous. Unfortunately, I experienced this firsthand after I wrote a deeply personal piece about my experience of having an abortion. The overwhelming majority of messages were positive and came from women thanking me for writing my story. But I also had messages from anti-abortion people who'd called me a murderer, told me my abortion had irreversibly, dangerously damaged my body, and told me I should stop thinking about myself and think about my baby. Most people watching this will have either had an abortion themselves, or they will have a partner, a wife, a sister, or a friend who has had an abortion. Women have been able to access abortion in the UK for 60 years, so it's easy to feel complacent that your rights cannot just simply be snatched away. But as we have seen in the US, that is exactly what happened. In the UK, there are politicians who are looking to limit women's access to an abortion. There is also a vocal anti-abortion contingent who are ready to harass women at what can be one of the most traumatic experiences of their life. This shows why we cannot take the right to have an abortion for granted. It is something that we need to fight for.